time for tonight's presentation. Tonight's speaker is a co-lead on the Evening Grosbeak Road to Recovery project, in addition to being the founder and board president of the Finch Research Network. Matt's worked in the field of social work with special needs populations at the William George Agency for 12 plus years, and is currently the bird product specialist and conservation coordinator for Aspen Song Wild Bird Food. Matt previously worked for 15 years at the Cornell Lab on golden winged warblers, voices of Hawaii's birds, and Merlin Bird ID. There he was also a project lead for the lab's first eruptive finch survey in 1999. Widely known as a preeminent authority on finches in North America, he has written finch species accounts for breeding bird atlases and birds of the world, as well as publishing several papers on finches and the Red Crossbill vocal complex, and most recently co-authored the newly published Stokes Guide for Finches with Lillian Stokes. So if you haven't gotten one, y'all missed out. This evening he'll talk about and update us on both the second project the Cayuga Bird Club approved in December of last year, and on the subject of tonight's book signing. So please join me in warmly welcoming Matt Young as he presents the Evening Grosbeak Road to Recovery project and the Stokes Guide for Finches of the United States. And
from what I understand.
you have an hour.
I know, I have an hour. So again, thanks for coming out, everybody, tonight. It's an honor to be here, and it's interesting. This is my second kind of what I consider my hometown kind of presentation. I did one at Baltimore Woods Nature Center about 3 or 4 weeks after the book came out back in September. But it's great to see faces that I've known in this crowd: Kevin McGowan and Bob McGuire and Ann Mitchell and Gladys Birdsall. I always tell everybody I did my first Cayuga Bird Club trip with you to Dryden Lake, and I think it was the winter of 1998. Maury Reed, it's an honor to see everybody, Bobby Monroe, and just a lot of faces that I've seen for a long. Mina, it's good to see you, Mina. It's been a long time since we were running around Montezuma on a muck race one year. But anyway, tonight I'm here to talk to you about Finches, United States and Canada, the book that I just co-wrote with Lillian Stokes. In the presentation, I'm going to actually talk about the Evening Grosbeak project. I'll give an update there because we cover it in the book as well, the project. In the book we kind of do, we do a backstory, a main breeding finches, finch eruptions. We also cover the Hawaii, finches in Hawaii, the honeycreepers, feeding and attracting finches, research and conservation, and then kind of how you can help. The backstory on this, it's kind of an interesting, there's always kind of these serendipitous moments, I feel like, when a book comes together. I'm sure you probably have had moments like that, Mari, over the years. So it was the beginning of the pandemic, 2020, that a flock of crossbills started landing at the Harris Center down the road from Lillian Stokes' house. Obviously, it was the beginning of COVID pandemic. Was also, we didn't know at the time it was going to be a super flight of finches that year. Unfortunately, Dawn, who she's written the other 35 books with, has Lewy body's dementia and is no longer, I actually got to see Don before we gave him a book, just before it came out. He still knows his birds. It's great to see that. But this flock of crossbills started landing at the Harris Center, and the executive director of the Harris Center called Lillian up and said, "Hey, Lillian, there's a flock of crossbills landing down at the Harris Center." So, she was kind of coming to grips with probably not doing another book. She talks, a lot of people don't realize that Lillian, one of the things her and I actually share is she was a psychiatric social worker before she became Lillian Stokes, the bird author extraordinaire on her 36th book. And so this flock came down there, and she started going down there and photographing them. And next thing you know, she starts recording them. She hears that she has to record these birds, and she has to send them to a Matt at Cornell. Well, I actually had just exited the Lab of O. She sent him to Matt Medler, a good friend of mine. A lot of people don't know, I was telling everybody I went out to dinner tonight, And Matt responded to Lillian, hey, you got to send them to my friend Matt Young. So she sends me these recordings. I start identifying them to call type. When crossbills fly over, they make these kind of jip, 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 kip, kip, kip calls. And the next thing you know, we developed this relationship, this friendship. And, now, here we are. Here's a photo that, Lillian took of that flock of birds. That's actually a recording that she sent me. And here we are now, 3.5 years later, we have this book. Now me, not everybody knows this story. In fact, I think a lot of people that knew me here don't even know this story. I actually have, my undergraduate is in hydrogeology, meteorology. And at the end of my degree at SUNY Oneonta in 1995, I realized I wasn't going to go into hydrogeology, meteorology. At the time, the most common job was something called LUST. It was the assessment of leaky underground storage tanks at old abandoned gas stations, believe it or not. So I realized this. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do this. This isn't for me. So I bought a pair of binoculars I was kind of late to the birding game. I was 24 at the time. I bought a pair of binoculars. I bought a Honda Accord. I actually went and saw a Grateful Dead concert with my brother David. And then the next day after the concert, I got up and drove cross country. I took about 10 days to get out to this place in the upper left photograph. Anybody know where that is? What is it?
Yellowstone.
It is Yellowstone, Lower Falls. So I go to Yellowstone, Lower Falls, and I grab my binoculars. I go there right first day I'm there, and a flock of crossbills comes in and lands above me and starts feeding. It's where it all began for me. So Lillian kind of share this bond over, she calls it her second spark bird. And here I am now 30 years later, author of this finch guide. Also launched the Finch Research Network about 5 years ago with a board of directors from around the world. So our paths crossed over crossbills. And that is actually literally what led to this book. Pandemic, superflight, paths cross over crossbills, and here you are. The picture of us right when we first got our author's copies. And that actually is so we go to Montague Sand Plains in Massachusetts when I first met Lillian and Don. And a gentleman drives up and says, there's no crossbills around. There have been crossbills reported at this point. And he drives off, and literally within 30 seconds, again, another serendipitous moment, a flock of crossbills lands at the back tire of Lillian's vehicles and just starts kind of like peeking out from the back of the tire looking at us. And that's actually the photo of the bird right there. So I'm going to dive into come on now. There we go. So the main breeding finches, and I actually took some of them out because I knew I was on a little bit of a time crunch, and I have an ability to talk if anybody knows me over the years. So the rosy finches, I do have a couple western ones in here, and then I actually some of the common ones, but I did take some of the main breeding ones out. But these are photos from the book, and some of the photos in this book, not particularly of this species, are Maury Reeds actually. So if there are some in here, I'm not exactly sure which ones, let me know. I think there's a red poll that we might have in this presentation because your name's in at the end. So, but anyway, so the great crown rosy finch, a lot of people don't realize you kind of have a cloudsland finch, and then you have this island finch, the Aleutian Island great crown rosy finch. And some of the recent genetics from some of the people that have been involved with this rosy finch working group actually suggest that the larger Aleutian Island subspecies of the gray crown rosy finch might actually be a full species, actually. It's, you have kind of these three rosy finches. Most of them are breeding at the top of these mountains, 12, 13, 14,000 feet up. But the Aleutian Island ones are bigger. They're actually breeding in abandoned buildings at sea level. And some of the genetics suggest that there could be a different species involved there. So black rosy finch, brown cap rosy finch, obviously cloudland finches. They're way, 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 way up there, and the Finch Research Network is part of this Rosy Finch working group. One of the greatest things I think about this book is, and a lot of people, I'm very happy with this book, obviously, but one of the things a lot of people have really given compliments is we kind of blended natural history, science, and storytelling, and even like weaved in the health benefits of bird watching. But Lillian wrote these these kind of creative essays they call quick takes to kind of bring to life the bird's personality at the beginning of each of the 17 main species that breed in the United States and Canada. And so when we were researching this, we kind of wanted to kind of do something along the lines of like a pet life history account. Everybody knows pet life history accounts. When you research it, there was actually a flock of house finches that were seen on Long Island like around 1940, and they didn't know what the heck they were, where they came from necessarily. And over the course of a couple years, there was kind of word of more sightings of these house finches, and she writes about this, how there was a pet store on Long Island that actually had a sign up that said Hollywood finches. Somebody was actually importing them in from the West Coast and trying to sell them on Long Island. One thing led to another. Some of the powers that be actually in the government were actually going to kind of, shut down this business, or at least we're going to confront the owner of the pet shop, and they actually released the birds. And that's how we ended up with house finches, actually from the East Coast to the West Coast, meeting the population in the West. So she writes about this in these creative essays at the beginning of each of the chapters. So there you go, you got the map all the way across the country. Obviously, mycoplasma is a disease that actually has kind of cut back some of the eastern population. House finch, regional dialects in the east, but not necessarily in the west. And a lot of people know this, female song actually is fairly widespread. Now, a lot of the females are not like singing all day long, but a lot of the finches actually, the females sing. Anybody know that? A lot of the females sing. It's a topic that obviously is becoming more and more interest from a research perspective. Almost all of the finches, there's a skewed sex ratio. A lot more males than the females. When we started to dive into this book, doing the research for it, we realized that there was a skewed sex ratio in just about all of the finches, actually. And the color comes from these dietary carotenoids that males get from basically what they eat in the wild. The redder, the better, the studies show that the females are picking the reddest males. American goldfinch, so I kind of do these first two species that everybody kind of knows, goldfinch and house finch. So goldfinch here, not a lot of people know there's actually there's 3 different subspecies that was represented on that map. In this book, we do deeper dives and interesting facts. So new research says female bill color is a status signal and settles disputes amongst females. This is obviously a little bit of a different crowd, but I've given this talk, or variations of this talk, probably about 20 times now in the last 4.5 months. And I always ask people, how many people think, they lost their goldfinches? Not realizing that they're actually the finch that changes suit twice a year, or their plumage twice a year. A lot of people go, oh, my goldfinches are gone. Now, they're still there, they're just looking a little bit different in the wintertime. Again, molts twice, carotenoid pigments from diet that it gets the color. Females choose the brightest males, just like in house finches. We also found in one study that polyandry was about 5% of the time. So females were actually having multiple partners in about 5% of the nest studies. Females on nest 95% of the time. Again, sex ratio a lot more males. Now the winter finch forecast. How many people know the winter finch forecast? Cool. Started by Ron Pittaway in 1999. Ron is no longer with us, unfortunately. And in the introduction, I did the first eruptive winter finch survey for the lab for bird source. Remember bird source, Kevin? Predated eBird. How many people have ever heard of, remember bird source? There we go, there's a few. It's the only place I get the hands that go up. Yep, bird source. I literally would go through listservs and copy and paste records over into a spreadsheet. That's how we created those maps. Steve Kelling's the one that, did you do any of those back then, Kevin? No? Yeah, that's how I did it. I would scan through listservs throughout North America and pull it over into a spreadsheet, and that's how those maps were originally created for some of those earliest winter finch maps. We only do the finch, so the Finch Research now puts out the finch forecast every year, and Tyler Warr is a board member of the Finch Research Network, only eastern part of the country, obviously. Been around for since 1999. These are actually, again, Citizen Science Project. We cover this in the book. Those dots on there, there's almost 100 people now giving us seed and food data from coast to coast. Obviously more concentrated in the eastern part of the boreal forest. Super flights, as I mentioned before, basically at the beginning of when we had the flock of crossbills land, that was almost kind of a harbinger of things to come that winter. All of the 8 eastern, although now hoary redpoll we lost, obviously as a species, but all of them kind of flew, in big numbers down the East Coast that year, and I'll get to that in some of the species I talk a little bit later, but what led to that super flight? It was kind of a combination of things. It was a generational spruce comb crop. There's been a budworm outbreak going on in Ontario and Quebec for the last about 10 years now, and there's also cyclical kind of nature, biennial patterns of finch eruptions, and they all kind of came together, and we had this amazing finch superflight. We don't do a forecast for the West. Anybody have any idea why we don't do it's hard to do, it's kind of hard to do a finch forecast for the West. Anybody have any idea why? Come on, there's going to be a couple people out there. Topography. Topography is very hard. A lot of the finch flights in the West are more altitudinal, not latitudinal. So a lot harder, a lot more local scale. So that's why we only do a finch forecast for the East. That's why Ron only really started it for the East. It'd be great to get to a point where we could do it for the West as well. Now, what drives these, and we talk about this in the book, what drives these kind of winter finch eruptions? It's, again, a combination where some of the species are driven more by conifer seed, like crossbills and siskins, and some of them are driven by more deciduous seed, like redpolls follow birch and alder catkins crops. Here you can see Baited Highway was one of the interesting stories with Evening Grosbeak, and this is the project of the Cayuga Bird Club. I'm going to get into this in a second, that they nicely donated $3,500 for nano tags. Much appreciated to this Evening Grosbeak Road Recovery Project. But a lot of people don't realize that evening grosbeaks weren't really that common, at least historically from the literature. They weren't common in the East. They followed this baited highway of box elder, at least is the belief, and as they kind of moved west to east, they found budworm outbreaks. And as they found these budworm outbreaks, they started to nest in the Northeast. And it was about the 1940s that they were confirmed breeding in almost all of the states, northeastern states, and maritime provinces. So a lot of people don't realize 5 different subspecies, 5 different call types. Again, call types, there's often an ecological and implied ecological specialization with the call types. We have 2 of them, or only 1 in the East, but I'm going to play a couple of them right now so you can get an idea on the differences in the sound. I'm going to play type 1, which is the eruptive one in the West. It can be found from Alaska to the southern border of Mexico. We only get type 3 in the East. Pretty different sounding bird. kind of a pure tone whistle compared to our bird, which I'm going to play right now. But let me stop that. Kind of more of a ringing quality to it, our eastern bird. So you can see the spectrum type 1 and type 3. It's a little more of a simple spectrum, the type 1. Uptick with a descending quality to it. So evening grosbeak decline, 92%. This is why it's been over the last 50 years. This is why this is a eBird breeding trends map. Like I said, 92% decline over the last 50 years. It's why it was chosen as one of the road to recovery birds. This is the group. It's a basically it's a multi-agency organizational project. Some people might recognize this guy. He's another Matt Sarver right there. He's also a board member of the Finch Research Network. But it's Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Powder Mill Research Center, and Carnegie Museum and the Finch Research Network are the ones that are kind of leading this project on. So possible factors leading to evening grosbeak decline. This is why we're kind of looking into this and we're putting these tags on these birds. Obviously, it's a budworm specialist birds. Clearly, the populations go up and down with budworm outbreaks across the boreal forest and also across the montane western forest as well. It's a naturally occurring, budworm. It's you might hear a lot of times like budworm warblers, bay-breasted, Cape May, Tennessee. Same thing with evening grosbeaks. Populations seem to go up, and Canada has actually managed the 10% hottest spots in the boreal forest since the last big budworm outbreak that ended in around 1988. They basically treat those areas because it's a very important cash crop, and a lot of jobs are driven by the logging industry in Canada, and if you don't treat it, it actually kills the tree. So, but there seems to be in some of these meetings recently I've had, there seems to be maybe a change in the mindset around whether this treatment's going to continue. It's very costly treatment. In fact, during COVID, they actually didn't treat for a couple of years. And the budworm outbreaks seemed to take off even more. And we saw grosbeaks, obviously this year we didn't see a huge eruption, but we saw grosbeaks a few times in the last 5 years around here. Habitat changes, they're also listed as a #1 species in the bird banding lab as far as window collisions in backyards. Any idea why that might be? Anybody have any answers on that? Any suggestions? What do you think? Sociality. So they're flocking. So greater numbers in your backyard, greater chance once they flush from a Cooper's hawk, one could hit a window. So they're actually #1 in the bird banding lab database for window collisions in the backyard. Disease, we actually saw a fair amount of mycoplasma when we were banding birds and tagging birds in Maine. We don't know exactly how common it is, but we did see it 1 year in about 20% of the birds actually. So we're looking into all this, and this is why we're trying to put these tags on these birds to get full annual cycle connectivity from the wintering grounds to the breeding grounds. Field operations, so that's kind of a fishing tent there on the right that we actually will hang out in. And these are bow nets that are used in the top here. So you put the seed down in the bow net, you kind of fold it back, and then you go into the tent, and then the birds come down, and you click a button, and then you get like 5 birds. Comes over the top of them, you get like 5 of them, you put the tags on. It's a very tense project, really. It takes a while, and you're doing this in cold temperatures. Here are Modus Tower readings we've had for birds that have actually been tagged with the nano tags, which are the radio tags that we're going to hopefully put on in the Adirondacks here in the next couple of weeks. But you can see, you know, there's a spot here in Pennsylvania, and a spot in the Adirondacks, and a spot in Maine where the stars are, where birds are moving to, from the wintering grounds to the breeding grounds. Here are the satellite tags. Now you're going to get a lot more readings on this. We've had several thousands of readings off of one bird with satellite tags, where you're lucky to get a few readings off of the nano tags. It's amazing, this bird here went all the way across the long length of the lake in one morning. We kept looking and looking and going, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but believe it or not, we actually had readings of the bird one morning here and the next morning all the way over in Quebec. So yeah, pretty amazing so far, some of the information we're already getting. So here's kind of a, you know, we're trying to determine the strength of the connectivity between the wintering and the breeding grounds, and the orange and red are actually where the spruce budworm outbreaks are. So you can see a lot of the birds that have been tagged are going back to these budworm outbreaks. So we really need to get somebody on the breeding grounds in these outbreaks. But grosbeaks are incredibly secretive, actually, believe it or not, on the breeding grounds. Here's I was just in Saxon Bog in Minnesota. How many people have been to Saxon Bog? Amazing this year. 9 great gray owls without even trying. 1 boreal owl. But they didn't even know that a lot of the birds that we banded in Saxon actually aren't even leaving Saxon. Like 5 of the 10 birds haven't actually left, and they're breeding there. And they didn't even fully realize, they knew there was a few birds breeding there, but the interesting thing is you can see birds from Saxon have gone to Quebec, gone to Western Ontario, and also gone up into Manitoba. Utah tagging, we finally got west last winter, early spring, and we were able to actually, we were banding at a site that had 2 different populations of evening grosbeaks, type 1 and type 4. And we actually were able to document a range extension of type 1, which you can see these 2 dots there down in the green. We knew that they basically bred at least to about southern Idaho, but they actually were breeding into Utah, which we thought was just going to be type 4s. So this is again what we're trying to get at with tagging these birds. Here's the overall numbers since the project began. It actually started as a wintering Pennsylvania grosbeak project in 2017. So yeah, we have 453 color-banded birds, 160 radio tags, 66 satellite tags, and 1 GPS tag. So where this year? It's been a small flight this year. We kind of predicted a moderate flight. Where we're going to basically end up is in the eastern Adirondacks over to probably the northern Vermont area. There's just not a lot of birds down here. Now there are, you know, where are we going to go to use some of these nano tags? There's several things you have to take into consideration. It's, you know, you have to have a willing homeowner willing to let you come and tag at their house. You also need kind of a place that doesn't have a lot of brush, believe it or not, to put those bow nets down on the ground. You also kind of want a saturation point of enough grosbeaks that they can't just, if you spook them, they take off and they're going to 3 other feeders, you have no idea where they are. So that's probably why we're going to end up in the Adirondacks putting some of these nano tags that the Cayuga Bird Club so nicely donated money to buy. There's an outside chance we could try in South Otselic. The flock that was over there first reported around Christmas, was around for about 3 weeks. It was about 20 birds, 24 birds, which is more than what's being reported around here. I think the 2 Melissas, Melissa grew as 4, Melissa pentas had like 6 or 8, I think. The South Otselic birds disappeared for about 3 weeks. They just showed back up again a couple days ago. So like, where are they going? So if we do it locally, we'll probably have 1 shot at it. So I'll keep you posted on that. But again, much appreciated. And Caleb obviously is helping with this project. He's a liaison kind of between the Finch Research Network and the partners on the project and the Bird Club. So we might be going next week, but I'll let you know. Moving on again, now purple finch, a lot of people don't realize 2 different call types. We have a paper coming out describing the 2. They're quite a bit different actually, the eastern birds and the western birds. And we have a little bit of a small, I would love to get a student. Finch Research Network's always kind of trying to raise funds to, for student projects. I would love to put a student somewhere in southern British Columbia where these 2 populations might meet to see what they're doing. Again, they have different flight calls, different songs, could be potentially a different species. Again, getting back to that super flight of finches, that year that we launched the Finch Research Network, Audubon ran a magazine article in October of siskins had taken over the country. And you can see in this eBird map the deep purples in the south that year. Look how the deeper purples all across the south. In fact, that was a year they were documented flying as night migrants for about 3 weeks in October that year, which siskins and finches in general aren't night migrants. Yellow variant of siskin, a lot of people don't realize they call it actually a green morph. Pretty badly named bird, to be honest with you. It's a pretty badly named, but food generalists. I mean, siskins are, I always say to people, siskins are part crossbill, they're feeding on conifer seed, they're part redpoll, they're feeding on birch catkins, they're part budworm specialists, because they'll actually feed on budworm, almost anything will really feed on these budworm outbreaks. And they're also part goldfinch, in that they'll feed on weed seeds a lot of times. Pine grosbeaks, 5 different subspecies. The Californica subspecies, pretty isolated, doesn't actually, in the breeding habitat where they breed, there is no spruce, unlike the other 4 subspecies. Redpoll's been in the news a lot this year. Everybody knows the redpoll now is just one species, right? Everybody knows that at this point. The interesting thing is how many people know that the study actually started at my house in 2013 in Cortland? I had a flock of birds, about 65 birds that year, an incredible diversity of morphs or plumage types. And I invited Taylor and Mason and Taylor out of the house, and that's where that study actually, so you can kind of blame me for this, for losing a species on your list. But basically, when they first published the first paper in 2015 suggesting that they actually be lumped, the knock on the paper was they didn't have enough definitive birds from Greenland, where the nominate hornomoni bird can be found. So then they expanded the study in 2021, published a paper, and it's a chromosomal inverted supergene that controls for that like frosty look to the hoary redpoll. So we no longer have, we just have one species of redpoll now. Red Crossbill project. So this is kind of the project that anybody's ever talked to me. I can talk about crossbills all day long. Again, a fascinating complex of these flight calls that go over, and with the flight call comes this implied ecological specialization. And slight differences in bill sizes that are better at foraging on certain conifers in certain areas. So I'm going to play a video here just to make sure everybody's awake, because it's kind of getting late on Monday at 8:30 here. Some incredible video from Tom Johnson. Unfortunately, Tom is no longer with us. I never get sick of looking at this. I don't know why anybody studies any other bird than crossbill. I really don't. I mean, I know, no disrespect, Kevin, with corvids, they're fascinating, but Just an amazing, amazing adaptation. That's what I saw that changed my life in Yellowstone. I mean, that's, again, the power of birds. It's just always, you never know when that seminal moment is going to pivot a life, and that's what it did. You know, I saw them feeding at Yellowstone, and look at this now, 30 years later. So one of the things I'm probably the most proud of in this book are these foraging charts. This is a long time of collecting information over a couple decades or more of trying to go, all right, what are these birds foraging on throughout the year? So if you think like a crossbill, everybody always goes, Young, how do you find crossbills so easily? And I said, you got to think like a crossbill. It all comes down to what is on the menu at a given time of the year. So for a crossbill, the cone cycle year starts like July 1, because cone crops are forming in the spring, and then they start to mature. And crossbills are looking for those newly formed cone crops. And a lot of times what happens is they want to forage on what is easiest. So your spruces and your hemlocks and your tamaracks, they have soft cone conifers. And the birds can get into those more easily because they're not as well defensed as like a red pine tree. Ever get hit by a red pine cone? They're pretty hard if you ever throw them at somebody. Don't suggest that though. But they want to feed on these kind of soft cone conifers. So what I'm showing here is they kind of breed really mainly in 2 breeding cycles. They don't really breed throughout the year. There are records of them breeding throughout the year, more so in the UK than here in the States. But again, they're going to breed in kind of that July to September period, utilizing the newly developed cone crops, typically on those soft cone conifers. The soft cone conifers also lose their seed the earliest. So come January, they actually are now wandering around looking for those last remaining soft cone conifer crops. And if there's good cone crops on spruce, they will actually nest in the middle of winter with 2 feet of snow on the ground at 20 below. How many people didn't know that? Anybody in the crowd? Yeah. It's an amazing, again, I don't know why anybody studies any other species. I mean, only passerine that actually nests in the middle of the winter like that. 20 below, 2 feet of snow on the ground. You go to the Adirondacks, or you go into Canada, and you can hear white wings and red crossbills singing if they found a good cone crop. Just a fascinating adaptation. There's a scientist, Dr. Bankman, in Idaho, or I should say University of Wyoming, that has done a lot of research on these birds. Dr. Groth is the one that actually described the original type 8, or the original first 8 crossbill call types. But Bankman actually has this theory that they all have a single key conifer concept, a single key conifer that they're most adapted for feeding on. I think that's true, but I think there's actually, and a lot of us on the Finch Research Network board, Tom Hahn, who's at UC Davis, has been on the scene studying crossbills since the late 80s, right? Just a few years after Craig and Jeff started studying crossbills. They're a lot more flexible than people realize, in my opinion. In fact, they'll actually feed on insects a lot more than people realize as well. But I do believe they have like 3 strategies. It's not just a key conifer concept, but some of them are actually specialized, like type 9, which is now elevated to Cassia crossbill, full species status. Very, very limited in its diet. But then there's type 2, 3, and 4 that are wandering across North America looking for the best cone crops. They're the nomads. They're constantly wandering around looking for the best, like the rich patches of resources. Now, type 12, which the Finch Research Network just published not that long ago, a paper came out in December. Again, a generalist here in the East. It doesn't make a lot of sense for a crossbill to be super, super specialized in the Northeast when there's not a high density of conifers. There's a high diversity of conifers, but not a high density of conifers. So I think there's 3 strategies they kind of have going on. Now, Bankman around 1998, 97, 98, asked himself the question, can I find a locally adapted, local variant of lodgepole pine east of the Rocky Mountains in the absence of tree squirrels? So he found in the South Hills that little purple dot in southern Idaho there. He found this newly described call type, sounded very different, didn't seem to move around, it was resident, didn't wander like the other crossbills. And after doing a marked recapture study, over 2,000 pairs, they assortatively mated with their correct call type more than 99% of the time. So and that's with type 2s and 5s coming in and out of that area. So even though there were other call types, they were all kind of playing and breeding with the type that they are supposed to be, kind of breeding with. Now, the interesting thing is that area has since burned. Like 50% of the habitat burned about 2021. And now Cayuga Crossbill has been found in Colorado, actually breeding, and also has been found in California and also Wyoming. So to a crossbill, it all really comes down to different environmental conditions can lead to them being pushed and moved to different areas where they might bump into one another. Which then when they bump into one another, they're forced to, they actually end up hybridizing at a higher rate. So I'm gonna play a couple of these call types just so you don't think I'm crazy and that they sound actually different. So I'm gonna play type 2 here. Be better named the eclectic crossbill than the ponderosa pine crossbill. So these are maps I did for the book as well. Type 4. Again, a nomad. 2 and 4 are nomads. We had the biggest eruption I've ever seen of both of these types 2023, just a year and a half ago. Click, click. Sounds different, right? Right? Click, click, click. Got a bounce to it, kind of. Type 3 is also one of the nomads. It's the smallest billed bird, West Coast bird, likes western hemlock in a lot of ways. Zigzag is the spectrogram. Kind of got a squeaky sound to it. Now I know I've listened to far too many crossbills for any healthy human being. And here's the one we just described, the northeastern one. Now there are 32,000 recordings of red crossbill in the Macaulay Library now. The next closest species, I believe, is Carolina wren at about 23,000 recordings. So it's certainly, the crossbill interest is taken off. Again, pretty different sounding though, at least to my ears they are. It's an upsweep and a down sweep. White-winged crossbill again, they also kind of nest in two main cycles. If you think of crossbills, you really need to think of white-winged crossbill as part of that same complex. It's the boreal crossbill, essentially. Red crossbills, most of red crossbills are actually found in the lower 48. Or in British Columbia. That's really the only place that they're super, super common north of the border. White-winged crossbills kind of do these pendulum swings from coast to coast, looking for white spruce primarily and tamarack. It is black spruce that is semi-serratinous, so there's a bit of a gel on black spruce, and it holds its seed longer. And it switches to that in late winter, early spring. So when you think like a crossbill, red crossbills are going to feed on primarily red spruce, tamarack to start the cone cycle year. Then they'll progress to white pine, and then they'll actually progress to the hard pines, like red pine, jack pine, pitch pine, whereas the white-winged crossbill will start the year with like white spruce. All of them will start with white spruce. It's the favorite crossbill munchie, really, as a lot of us Lotziophiles will call it. And then they'll actually switch to the black spruce later in the season because it holds the seed the longest. So vagrant finches we do cover in the book as well. Lillian wrote, the wrong bird in the wrong place at the wrong time has the potential to send birds into mega rarity delirium. So status of vagrants, there actually is a code they give to these mega rarities. Anywhere from 1 to 5. And brambling is a 3. Many records, actually brambling is nested in the Aleutian Islands. Hawfinch. So the interesting, she was actually, Lillian, when she was doing the research for this book, she actually found this record in eBird of a ship that was coming from China to California, and it had a hawfinch, a brambling, and a rustic bunting that the people on the ship were actually feeding it to keep it alive, keep them alive. I know, it's pretty wild. Not countable birds in California, though. Ship-assisted birds are not countable. A lot of the people were pretty bummed about that. Palace Rosy-Finch, again, another ode to Tom Johnson here. He took this photo. He's no longer with us, but only one record, St. Paul, Alaska, in 2015. So again, these, we cover actually more than what I'm showing you tonight, but because of time, I got to keep things moving. One of the things that's super, super important to Lillian and I is the power, again, or the mental health benefits of bird watching. And so Lillian wrote this little poem in the book, look, flashing gold and black, see wings descending, watch flocking seed seekers, hear chirping sleigh bells, notice evening grosbeaks feeding, realize you forgot to worry about anything. And that's actually a feeder that Bard Prentice built for me right there, at my feeder that had evening grosbeaks for the people that remember Bard. And it's a photo that Jay took. By the way, Jay took that photo. It was actually at the Hubble Chalet. I lived in the city at the time and I didn't get grosbeaks, so I was like, all right, you keep this feeder for me up at Summer Hill, and they had grosbeaks. So again, health and wellness, more and more studies coming out about the health and wellness of bird watching. Finch safety, obviously super important. Again, the flocking nature of them leaves them susceptible to window collisions and to disease. So clean the feeders, keep the feeders far enough away from windows or close enough to windows that they can't build up that critical speed that they can hurt themselves. Hawaiian honeycreepers. How many people didn't know honeycreepers were actually finches? A lot of people, I know. So recently, what's a finch? That's a question I get in almost all these presentations I give, and I'm like, that's a good question, actually. What is a finch? So we all a lot of us grew up thinking finches were birds with, conical bills used for cracking seeds. But, taxonomy is kind of mixing that all up now. And the understanding is about 5 million years ago, a flock of rose finches, or maybe 2 flocks at 2 different events of rose finches, actually wandered off course, landed in Hawaii, and adaptively radiated out to about 54 species of honeycreepers that are now lumped as Fringillidae finches. And some of them, like the eevee up top there, a nectivorous species, looks nothing like a finch. That a lot of us kind of grew up thinking a finch was what a finch looked like. So again, an amazing adaptive radiation of these finches, and unfortunately, they have been kind of dealing with lots and lots and lots of challenges, from snakes to feral pigs, but the biggest issue is this avian malaria. So it's a Culex house mosquito, non-native, one bite actually gives most of these species malaria, and they die. And we've watched them now go down to about 16 species left. Akakiki is now functionally extinct in the wild. There's about 45 individuals in captivity. Palila, it's like the one that actually does look like a finch, has a bill that looks like a finch, or at least what we grew up thinking a finch was. Specialist on Mamani seeds, related to bullfinches and in Europe and pine grosbeaks here in the United States. A koe, again, just a gorgeous looking bird. Declining small population, malaria threat as well. Kind of people call it the punk rocker because of that kind of fro it's got going on in its head there. Akia polaau, I can finally kind of say these names now. Hopefully I'm not doing too bad with them, Peter. Amazing adaptation again, that bill kind of functions as two separate bills but in unison. The lower bill taps like a woodpecker, the upper bill scoops out the insects. Just an, again, amazing adaptation. Again, if Darwin landed there, I wonder where these birds would be today. You know, the interesting thing is the Galapagos finches are now known as tanagers. I don't know if a lot of people even knew that. Hawaiian amakihi is the only one that actually is resistant to apapani, possibly, but Hawaiian amakihi is the only one that's resistant to the avian malaria. These are Jack Jeffrey's photos, by the way, Peter, that were used in the book. He's a friend of Peter Harity up here, is a friend of Jack Jeffrey, and we used his photographs for the book. So the deal is, again, with Hawaiian honeycreeper conservation, one bite leads to this malaria, and what is being implemented by the Birds Not Mosquitoes. Everybody heard of Birds Not Mosquitoes program? That the American Bird Conservancy is an initiative, multi-organization, agency project, and they're basically implementing mosquito birth control. And it's an incredibly expensive endeavor, as any of these kind of recovery projects are, whether it's the Evening Grosbeak one, we keep fundraising around the Finch Research Network, or Birds Not Mosquitoes, is they're actually taking mosquitoes in California, giving them this incompatible Wolbachia bacteria, flying them back out to the islands and then releasing them in areas. And when they mate with the females, because of the incompatibility, the females lay sterile eggs. Hopefully, making the population go down to as close to zero as hopefully as possible. Just amazing birds, and hopefully this will work. They're doing releases now in Kauai and Maui. They have been for about the last several months to a year now. So fingers crossed, this works. Research and conservation for all the Fragilidae finches is basically what the Finch Research Network specializes in, what we specialize, obviously, with this book. Vocalization is usually important. Genetic studies, why the sex ratio difference in all the finches. These are for the students. Any students in the crowd want to study finches? Here's some good topics. Song and females, mimicry or imitation in the finches. Why are pine siskin and lesser goldfinch and Lawrence's goldfinch really good mimics or imitators? But American goldfinch does not mimic. Why does Caston's finch and purple finch? Really good imitators, but house finch doesn't mimic. So some things to kind of look into there. Logging, obviously a big conservation issue, particularly with crossbills. You take out the old growth conifers. The older trees produce the best cone crops. You take those out of the mix, crossbills are going to struggle. What drives eruptions, we're always going to be studying, and how you can help record. When I launched the Finch Research Network, we wanted students, everybody to be involved, whether you're a writer, a Finch enthusiast, or a sound recordist, deposit your recordings of Macaulay. We also have a couple iNaturalist projects. I'm starting to lose my voice here at the end of the night, but we have a Become a Finch Forecaster, Finch Food Assessment project. We also have a crossbill foraging project, and I always say, and I leave you with this: keep your finches. Wellness for finches is wellness for you. You take care of those finches; they're going to give you a lot of enjoyment in your backyard. And photo credits, yes, Mari, I believe your name. Am I wrong? Oh, there it is. Yes, there it is, right there. Is that your photo?
No.
It is not. Sorry. Sorry. Anyway, that's all I have for you. Thank you very much. Any questions? We have about 85 minutes. Yes.
I understand recently that American goldfinches will be feeding their nestlings not insects but seeds. What do they feed nestlings for crossbills and evening grosbeaks?
The grosbeaks actually they'll feed the budworms. Crossbills, it's similar to goldfinches. It's like a paste made up of the seed. Basically, they have some enzymes, digestive enzymes, that help break that down, and then they kind of regurgitate a paste into the young's mouth. Yeah, it's pretty cool to watch if you like that kind of thing. Any other questions? Yes, Marty.
Just a comment. You talked about goldfinch polyandry.
Yes.
I was once in my backyard watching a goldfinch nest, and I could see the female on the nest and the male would come and feed her. Male disappeared for a while. She snuck off and went some 100 yards away and mated with another male goldfinch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's actually white-winged crossbills also seem to do it. I mean, I think, nature has some funny quirks out there when you dive into the research. That's all I'll say. I mean, this is, again, the first Stokes guide, and we had 12 pages of citations in the book. Lillian calls it her best book because it kind of incorporated everything she's added in her books over the 35 to 40 years. So when you dive into doing the research for a book, or even when you do a class, I'm sure, Kevin, even people that are very, very knowledgeable on a subject, you always find things that you go, really? Wow, I didn't know that. And that's the beauty of, and why we love what we love, what we do. But any last minute questions? Because I know are we going to get locked out or something if we?
No.
It is, okay, all right. They made it, Laura was like, you better be done. That's at a certain time. So any other questions out there? Yes, sorry.
This is a weird question coming from a person who really doesn't yet know crossbills, but maybe interesting. Has anybody studied the direction of crossing?
Yes, we think it's time. So the interesting thing is with red crossbills, the directionality of the cross is 1-to-1 actually. Left over right, right over left, 1-to-1. White-winged crossbills, and I always get this wrong, it's actually skewed. It's 3-to-1. We believe it has to do with the food that they eat. We don't know for sure. White-winged crossbills are mainly feeding on spruces, whereas red crossbills are feeding on a much wider variety of foods. Red crossbills actually have a much stronger jaw musculature than white-winged crossbills too. So I don't know if that plays into it. It's a great question, and yes, it has been studied, but we're really not 100% sure, which is kind of what happens with a lot of science. You kind of have your hypothesis, and then the other thing is, I'll just throw this in there because I have a buddy of mine that always loves to throw the white-winged. Everybody hear white-winged crossbill and red crossbill sing?
Yeah.
Which one's louder? Any ever thought about it? White-winged crossbills, much louder. Hormones go up, much bigger testes actually than red crossbills. It's a known fact. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, white-winged crossbill just sings like crazy, much louder than a red cross. Red crossbill kind of has a wimpy-ish sounding song, in my opinion, compared to some finches. Any other questions out there? Yes.
I've only had crossbills at my residence 1 year.
Yep.
And we had, I think it was balsam firs that we had, that just the cones were all over the place. But they seem to cut them in half and waste everything except right where they split it. Is that normal or?
They only eat the seeds. So when you look,
It only seemed to be like the middle of the cone. They would split the cone in half, and on the ground we found the rest of the cones.
was there seeds there too? Do you know?
Yeah, at the extremities of the cone.
I mean, believe it or not, one interesting topic that Tom Hahn is really interested in studying right now is they often will go after insect outbreaks within foliage or cones even. So they're actually feeding on a lot more insects in that spring period. So I don't know if the bird was actually looking for insects that might have hatched in there, but generally they're just going after the seed. I'm just going to go back to.
It just seemed to me like such a waste, because they just cut it
Yeah.
in half and leaving the rest of it.
I'll take another question, but I'll keep playing this 'cause it's so dang good. Anyway, yes, Mina.
So has anyone looked at the physiology of these birds? Because spruce budworms have high quantity of pinene, terpenes they're called. So they must have a digestive system which can handle those things.
They have a high resistance, you're saying?
No, high content of terpenes. Terpenes are chemicals.
In the
So one person at a time.
Sorry.
No, what did you say though, Mari?
Terpenes.
Terpenes, is that what you're saying? Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
terpenes.
I don't know, it's a good question. I mean,
Because a lot of birds which feed on spruce budworms and all. Actually, my supervisor did studies on spruce budworm,
oh,
and he was one of the main person to find pheromones which could stop, which were used as a kind of bait to mating spruce
budworm.
worms,
Ah.
but I mean like moths of these things. So
I know that's how they pick up the pheromones. They put out bags and they put these out throughout the forest
right.
to see where these concentration points of the pheromones, because the moths will come in from many miles away.
So insects do contain lot of amount of terpenes, which are not very easily digestible by most of the
Other
birds.
species.
Yeah.
Interesting. So was there I don't know if anybody studied that. That was your basic question. Right?
Right.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'll have to look at that actually.
Yeah.
But maybe you can look at that. But no, I'll look at that actually. Any other questions? Yes, back room.
New student.
Well, I have a question, but I first wanted to say a comment, which is that you blew my mind about finches, Darwin finches being teenagers, and adult finches. I'm from the Galapagos Islands.
Okay.
I grew up with Darwin finches.
Yeah.
So you blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I
It's
totally agree about if Darwin came here. Well, Darwin wasn't actually interested in finches when he went to the Galapagos. He thought
was
they
just-
were boring and the same. So I totally agree. If he had come to like Hawaii and seen the honeycreepers, his mind would have been blown away as well. But I just wanted to ask you, how do you make the videos of the spectrograms? How do you?
Oh, that was an old program I used here. It was like iMovie. It wasn't iMovie. It was. I'll have to look at it. I don't even think they have them anymore. But they're nice, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
A great way to communicate.
I'm amazed they still work in the presentations because I've literally been using those for about 15 years, and you can kind of see
Yeah.
You can still do that.
You can.
You can. I mean, but you have to use two programs.
Oh.
OBS Studio and either Adobe Audition or whatever you are using, and make a video of that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, they're very effective. They're very nice.
Yeah, I can tell you how to do it.
Okay.
All right, we are at time. Thank you everyone for coming.